Okay, Zok Televon. Mechusar begotten. Minolan, how do we know that a kohen who's not wearing all of the big dekuna, if he's missing one, how do we know that there's a white psula? Omar Abavo, Amar Yechanan, Umatu Ba Mishmei, the Rabbi Losa Bar Shimon, Damakra, the Chagarta Oisam Avnate, Arin Uvanov, the Chavash Telemek voice, she should put their gartels around, she should put their hats on, the Haisa Lahem Kahuna, that's the key word, Haisa Lahem Kahuna, L'chuka Salam. And we darshan bisman shebigdeim aleim, when they're wearing their begadim kahunasan aleim, then they have the din of a kohen. Ein bigdeim aleim, ein kahunasan aleim. If they're not wearing their begadim, they're felt in their kahuna. As Rashi says, halavisha hazois, v'hais aleim halavisha hazois. This dress will be to them kahuna. Alma Kihunasan Tuluya Bibigday. Their status as Kaihanim links or depends upon their begodim. Viloy Havaluzar. And if they're not wearing their begodim, they're like a Yisrael. Vizar Ashkechan, the Machalavoida. We've already proven through other psukim before that a Zar who does the avoida is possible. Zok Gemara, Helcha Nafka, Mahasam Nafka. We have other limudim. The Gemara is going to go through this several times. The Gemara is going to have different mekayros for the same halacha. We already know from over there that the big dekunim ma'akev the tanya minayin l'shasuya yayin. How do you know if a kohen drank wine? Shem avad chila, that if he did the avoda, it's michal avoda. Talmudomer yayin v'shecher al taste, and then it says afterwards ulahavdil beina kodesh uveina chayil. And Rashi says, "Uveina chol" means avodah shata oved b'shechres kruya chol. So you see that the Torah refers to the avodah done by someone who drank wine as chol. Zok Gemara, that's just shechres. Mechusa begadim, which is the subject of our Gemara. V'shalei rachut shadayim v'raglayim minayin. How do we know that that also has the same halacha as yayin, and therefore as shechres, and therefore it will be mechal avodah? Hamadomer chuka l'gzerah. So Rashi b'shasuya yayin, it says chuka soilim, like we just saw. And by mechusa begadim it says kahuna l'chuka soilim. So we're learning the halacha not independently from the pasuk of begadim. Rather, we only know it because it's gzerah shava from the parsha of begadim to the parsha of shasuya yayin. Or v'chitzas yad v'regel ksiv hasam. So as well by washing from the kiyar, it says chayk. We learned those two chaykers from the chayk that said in the parasha of Shesuyai. Zog to Gemara weiter. It's not fair because imay hasam, if I only had the halacha of Shesuyai, hava mina hanamila avodah dezar chayiv alim mitzah, I would have thought the only type of avodah that if it's done without begodim, it'll be possible, is only the type of avodah that if a zar would have done it, the zar would be chayiv misa. Now the zar is not allowed to do any avodah, but there's only four main avodas that if a zar does, he'll actually be chayiv misa for. That's rika Torah, nisuch hamayim, and nisuch hayayim. Because those are completing the nesino, which we have a limit to teach that. So I would have thought only by these four avodas, if the kohen is missing begodim, it'll be possible. I will avoid the ein zar chayiv ela misa emaloi kamashalom. Now, why would I have thought? Because if I learned of Shasuya Yain, I would have thought it's only relevant by an avodah where zar is chayiv misa. What's the shaychus? Zok Rashi. The reason for that is because the dechsiva hukra v'vayachem eloy moed v'loy samusu, and we learn about avodah sheyesh b'chiv misa l'psula makasa v'davar, because it says in the pasuk of Shesuya Yayin, which is Yayin v'shech al taste, over there at the end of that pasuk. It says v'loy samusu. V'yayim v'shech al teish atu v'nech yitach b'vayachem el oil moed v'loy samusu. So maybe it's only the type of avodah that a zor would get misa for. How do I know that even every other avodah, if it was performed by a kohen without the big kahuna, how do we know it would be possible? That's why we have in pasuk of kahuna by God in the first pasuk that we quoted. Zok to Gemara. So now we know by mechusa begodim it'll be possible even if it's a voida that a zor wouldn't be chayiv misa for. But now we got to go back to shisuya yain. Shisuya yain, we know. How do you know about shisuya yain? He'll passel on a voida even though it's an avoida that a zor wouldn't be chayiv for. Now we just flipped the whole script around. Now the makar for shisuya yain is from mechusa begodim and not the other way around. Frank the Gemara, what do you mean? Vatana ulahavdil. Didn't you just say a minute ago in the Brisa that the Tana of Shisuya Yain learns it out of the pasuk ulahavdil in the kodesh and the choil that an avodah that was done under shechris is choil? Zok the Gemara, that's kanasav lo makama the leikum gzereshah. Before the Tanakama, before the Brisa asked the question, how do I know this applies to mechusa begodim? So on the top of our Amud, Talmud Leimer, chuka l'gzera shava. At that point, there's a chazara, there's a reversal. Originally, when the Tana was pondering the halacha, yes, the Tana learned it from the Havdal. But once the Tana discovered chuka, because he wanted to learn from there to mechusa begodim, now mechusa begodim is the makor. Correct Gemara, but that's not what the Brisa says. Yes, the Tana introduces a Gzer Shava, but that's not to be the Makar for Shasuya Yayin. That's to be the Makar for Mechusa Begodim. Dr. Gemara, Hachikama.
What are we learning from Mechusa Begodim?
That the Avodah will be Psula, even if it's an Avodah that a Zor wouldn't be Chayiv for if he did it.
That's only by Mechusa Begodim, right? How are you going to learn from?
So the Gemara says,
I'm
sorry, we're not asking if it's Chayiv Misi. We want to know what type of avodas, if performed under this condition, would passel the avodah. So by Shisuya Yain, it's referencing Chayiv Misa. So it's a mashma. It's only the type of avodah that a zor would be Chayiv Misa for. But if it was an avodah that a zor wouldn't be Chayiv Misa for, then it wouldn't passel the avodah. That's what the Gemara is clear.
Therefore, how could you learn it with the Torah to Shisuya Yain?
So the question: how do you know that it passes? How do you know Sai Shisuya Yain and Sai Mechusa Begodim? How do you know that they will passel on an avodah, even if it's an avodah that a zor would not have been Chayiv Misa for? So there's only 4 avodas that a zor would be Chayiv Misa for, which are Zurika, Haktara, Nisach, Hamayim, and Yayin. Because they're the end of a sequence where there's a Nesina happening. Shechita, for instance, there's no Nesina there. It's just in preparation of the Zrika. Kabbalah, Eilacha are all in preparation for the Zrika. So how do you know if the Shechita, if the Kabbalah, if the Eilacha was done, Mechusa Begodim, how do we know that avodah would be possible? So that, because the pasuk Mineu Bey that we first quoted from, which was the Chagartais of Avneit, Aaron Avanav, the Chavashla Mekvois, V'hoisla Mekvuna, there's no mention of Misa there. There it just says they don't have a din of Kayanim unless they're wearing a B'dei Kahuna. So therefore that will pass any of it. So now it's exactly instead of the source, Shusay Yain is declined. Does that make sense? Okay. So Zok to Gemara, the Brisa clearly says that Shisuya Yain is the source. You want to turn it around and say that Shisuya Yain is the client? Zok to Gemara, Vatan Lahavdil. Zok to Gemara, that's Kanas of law, Makama, the like Shava. For Gemara, but Vatana Mechusa Begodim to kill Shisuya Yain. Zok Hachikamer. Minayin Shilo Nechlatu. How do you know? So this is how you read the Brisa of Shisuya Yain. Not the way we thought. Minayin shesur yain shim over achila. Shim over achila tavidor miyayin v'shech al taste. We'll have them. Now it's not asking mechusa begodim. Now what the Gemara is asking is minayin. How do we know? How do we know that shaloi nechalku bein mechusa begodim v'shesur yain? So the Gemara, the Braysh Shail over here is mechusa begodim minayin doesn't mean mechusa begodim minayin. How do you know that yain v'shecher, that shechurus has the same parameters as the mechusa begodim, and that even if it's an avoida that a zor wouldn't get killed for, it's still going to be possible if you did that avoida when you had too much to drink, and for that we know it's from Talmud chukah chukah. So in fact, the chukah chukah is always being used as a mikor, that even if it's an avodah that a zor wouldn't be chayav for, if it's done with a mechusa begodim, or if it's done with shusur yain, the avodah itself would be possible. Okay, Zok the Marayim. Nine shall nechlu bein mechuser begodim shusur yain v'shloim yain beglaim tavlo mechuka chukah l'zer shava. So for the Gemara, once you have the Zer Shava and you can use mechusa begodim as a makar, so bechlal, what do I need lahavdil for? Because now the whole halacha of Shesur Yain is redundant because we know it all with all its details from Mechusa Begodim. Zok Gemara, look at the Rav. What did Rav say? Rav said that it says to teach you that not only may you not to avoid it when you're drunk, you're not even allowed to paskin shailus or darshan barabim, because when you're being mabdul in kodesh and kol, when you're paskening, you have to be very careful not to drink them. The Rav Rav wouldn't appoint an announcer for him because he wasn't going to say any shir on the day of Yom Tov where he drank for 24 hours. He wouldn't even say a shir. He wouldn't even pass in shilas mishum shechros, and that is what he learned from the pasuk of Shesur Yain. Not only you're doing avoda, but also when you're being mabdul in kodesh l'chol. A posuk is being mabdul in kodesh l'chol. Akati mehacha nafka. Are you telling me that this is the makar? We have another makar for mechusa begodim. Mehatam nafka. It says v'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakayin. So this pasuk is referring to getting dressed in the kahuna. Rashi mehacha nafka, mehazam nafka. Kati karachuniksev ulamai itzur hakayin hacha kabe v'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakayin eish lashemina mechusa begodim. So why do we need this next pasuk for? It says v'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakayin eish al mizbeach. Let's see the dal to quote our pasuk. It says. So we learn so we learn hakayin. What does hakayin mean to tell us? Bikihunoi, only if he's fully dressed. Limud al kayin gadol shalovash big de kayin hedget. If the kayin gadol was not wearing his own uniform, rather the uniform of a kayin hedget, va'avad and he did avodah absula. Zok to Gemara ime hasam. If we would have only had that pasuk over there. I would have thought that the only type of avodah that a kohen who does mechusa begodim will pasul is if it's an avodah that's ma'akav kapara. As Rashi says, imeyasam maybe haisalahem kahuna, which is our pasuk, have a mukmin lahu avodah hamakeves kapara. I would have thought it's only one of the major avodah types. The avodah that we're talking about in this pasuk of V'nas Nakaran is talking about putting eitzim al eish. That's not a shchita, kabbalah, hilachos, rika. It's an auxiliary avodah. Aval nasilis eish shall hedget the mitzvah ba'almi. If you want to bring a fire to the mizbeach, that's a mitzvah ba'alma. Sharayesh shamesh sheyardim min hashamayim. Anyway, there's fire al pines that came from Shemayim in the mizbeach every day. You didn't need to add fire to it, but there is a mitzvah to add fire. So I would have thought that avodah would be kshera. Emaloi tiboy begadim kamash v'lon v'nosnu b'de'aron hakayin eish lahaknikas of hacha chesarim begadim Why does it mention Chesaron Begodim when it talks about the avodah of putting fire on the Mizbeach? Lemeilach, to teach us the af avodah she'enim mechutz hakabar, even by an avodah that's not really part of the sequence of the carbon, the Yovid Aaron, the big the hedget, lav shopper of it. It wouldn't be appropriate. So it's designed to passel because it's not an avodah of karbonis, but nevertheless, even to do something as simple as just putting fire on the Mizbeach, it also needs to be done with the big dekuna. I would have thought, like, Kamash Shalom, that pasuk of V'nostu b'di Aaron, that even for that, they have to read the big dekuna. Zok Gemara weiter. We have another makar for we're a fourth makar for Mechutz Begodim. It says V'archu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim es HaNesachim. So let's have a look at the full pasuk. It says V'archu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim es HaNesachim es HaRoish es HaPodar ala Eitim asher ala Eish asher ala Mizbeach, doing the Aktorah. And we learn that Kohanim b'chihunan once again when they're in their status of kahuna, when they're wearing begodim. Mikan kohen hedget shalavish bigdi kohen gadol ve'avad avodas psula. If a kohen hedget was wearing the begodim of a kohen gadol, the avodas is psula. So you see, mechus begodim is possible. Dr. Gemara, no. If we only had armor car here in our sugya, havamina hanamili chisar. If you're mechus begodim, if you're wearing less than the prescribed amount, a kohen hedget is wearing 3 instead of 4. A kohen gadol is wearing 7 instead of 8. Avol yitur. But if you're wearing extra begodim, like a kohen hedget who's wearing the uniform of a kohen gadol, loy, maybe that's not a psul. Kamashval in this last pasuk that even if a kohen hedget dresses like a kohen gadol, that also is inappropriate. Taner Rabbanan, hayumi rushalim. What if he was a yeshivish guy and his pants were too long and they're rubbing on the floor, or misulakim, or they were too short? They were what we would call flood pants, or mishuchakim, if they were worn out. The avad needed avoda, avodah ksher. The avodah would be kosher. But lova shnei michnasayim. But if he wore 2 pairs of pants, shnei avneit and 2 gartels, or chosor achas yeser achas, if he was missing a baguette, or if he had an extra baguette, oisha hoishaloi ritia al makas besore tachas bigdoi, or he had a wound and he had part of his skin is bandaged, and therefore that part of the big dekuna is not making direct contact with the skin. Oisha you mitush toshin, or the clothing were mitush toshin, as Rashi says, dirty, the tint. Oy mikuroyin, or torn. Rashi just felt them was so big the kodesh the chavul safaris. The other thing that avodah absurd. Some maybe done Shmuel Mirushalim Sharon. He also Mirushalim Sharon, which I believe we had on the Amud Aleph. It says also Sharon, but here he said Misulakim is psulin, and the Bryce on the Amud Aleph said Misulakim. If it's a little bit too short, it would be kosher. I vatani Misulakim Sharon. Amar Rabbi Bachamo like kasher. Kan shel silkan ayde avneit kan the less nume karaklau. If it's too short, because it's simply too short, there's not enough fabric, that's where we say Misulakim is psulin. That's where Shmuel says psulin. But sometimes what you could do is you can have a long baguette and you could fold it over and then tie it up with a gartel. So there it looks short, but technically it's not really short. That is where the Bryce says it will be kosher. Rav said echad zeh ve'echad zeh psulin. Everything's possible. No matter how it's shortened, it's going to be possible. Rav Huna Ikloi ula Argiza, he came to the city of Argiza. Ramalei bar Ushbezichne, the son of his host, asked him the following question. The God Ladar came, so the host son wanted to shmuz learning with him. And he has to be polite because he's being hosted, so he has to listen to the questions of the guests of the host's son. Miyamar Shmuel, the Shmuel actually say that Miru Shalom would be ksherim, and then Misulakin would be psulim. But Tanya, we learned Misulakin ksherin. We have a Bryce on Amud Aleph that says Misulakin is ksherin. Amarlei, so Rav Huna said that's not a kasha. Bar Minadahi, the Shanya Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama already explained that and said that when is it possible if the baguette is too short? When is Misulakin kosher is if it's not too short, but it was folded over and tied over. El Rav kasha. but it's Shver and Rav, because Rav said everything is psulin, if Sai Musalakin, and Sai Murushalim. And the bride said it's kosher. V'chitayman, if you're going to want to find for Rav, my Murushalim, what does Murushalim mean? It means Misulakin Ayde Avnate, the Avnate Megas Ogis, Murushalim. You know why Murushalim, if it's too long, it's going to be possible? Because it was folded back and it's tied up, and he considers that, and Rav considers that as totally removed. Well, then Elam Misulakin Kasha. So then, why is Misulakin going to be kosher? Amar Abzeira, Rav Chadatani. Rav doesn't learn the brisa that is listing two cases. One of Mirushalim where it's too long, and one of Misulakin it's too short. It's one case. It's a Mirushalim Misulakin. If you had a beggar that was too long, that was folded over and tied up, and that's why it's now short, that's where Rav says it's possible. I'm sorry, that would be kosher. That would be kosher. If it's only Misulak, because it was really too long and it was folded back over, that's what's going to be kosher. That's what the brisa means. But Mishalon alone or Misulakin alone will be possible. Okay, gewaltig. Okay. Zok Gemara weiter. Now, the problem is we have to point out the Rav says if it's folded up and it's short because of that, that makes it possible. So therefore, Rashi explains the misulakin that the Brisa says is kosher is if it's folded back, but it's still the right size. So Mirushalim misulakin, if it was too long and you sort of hemmed it up by folding it back, and now it's an appropriate size, that would be kosher. But if it's folded back too much and now it's short, then it would be possible. Omar B'Yirmi Midifti. Mirushalin shaloi silkan tanoihi. If it was too long and it wasn't hemmed up, that is a machlokes tonight. The Tanya we learned al arba kanfos kesus. It says gedilim tasalacha al arba kanfos kesuscha asher tachaseba. So we learn arba v'lo shalish. A beged of 4 corners is mechuyev in tzitzis. A beged of 3 corners is not mechuyev in tzitzis. Or eino yela arba v'lo chamish. No, maybe what it means to say is if you have a beged with 5 corners, it's potter from tzitzis. Zok Gemara, no, that's not. We're not going to say that. A beged with 5 corners will be chayiv in tzitzis. Kishu Eimer asher techasaba. Asher techasaba is a riboy to include something that even has more than 4 corners. Hooray, balas chamesh am. Hamani mekayim arba, a minimum of 4. It means arba v'lo shalish, not arba v'lo chamesh. Correct Gemara, Asher Techasab was a riboy. Arba is a meat. How do you know the meat is for 3 and the riboy is for 5? Maybe it's Pugflicker. Maybe 5 is potter and 3 is chayiv. Umar Royce, Larabis Balas Chomesh, Ulahoitzi Balas Sheish, Gemara because Marbani Balas Chomesh, Sheyesh Bechlal Chomesh Arba. When you have too much, it's never a problem because too much means you have what you need and 1 extra. That wouldn't be excluded from the midst of tzitzis. Because in 3 you don't have 4. That's one brisa, which would indicate that Mirushalim shouldn't be a problem. If you have too much, it's never a problem. But the Tanya Yidich, al arba kanfos ksuscha, arba v'lo shalish, and arba v'lo chamesh. My love, what's the machlokes between these 2 brises? If 5 corners makes it not roy for tzitzis, the Mars over yeser command the Isa dummy. If there's an extra one there, you consider it. It's there. It's 5, and therefore it's possible from being mechuyev in tzitzis. Same thing as if you have too long a beged, it's command the Isa dummy. It's possible. Umar over command a lesser dummy.
Corners are corners, and the beggar is a beggar. So just because it's in the spirit, like actual corner, you don't have.
It could have an extra corner.
But not having a corner, where the beggar is long or short.
Well, the question if there's extra there, do you ignore it or not? That's really the question. If there's extra there, do you ignore it? So Zok Gemara, Umar Savar command the Isa dummy, you don't ignore it. Umar Savar command the lesser dummy, and therefore you would be able to ignore it. And that the Gemara wants to say would be the same machlokes if a beggar is too long. Zok Gemara loy. The Chula command the Isa dummy. Everybody else, if it's too long, it's too long. The shiny halcha. You know why there's a machlokes, whether or not a beggar of 5 corners is mechuyev in tzitzis, is the Rabbi Rachmana Asher Techasaba, because there's a riboy of Asher Techasaba to tell us that another one is included. What if you hold that it's possible, it's not a good beggar for tzitzis with 5? What is he going to use it for? He uses it to teach us a different halacha. It says over Isa Moisoi about the tzitzis, right? Over Isa Moisoi, I said it was chaydim called mitzvahs Hashem. Parat l'chasus laila. At night you don't see. Therefore, a beged, a nighttime beged, pajamas are not mechuyev in tzitzis. Oy eina ela prat l'chasus suma. Maybe it means the clothing of a blind person who can never see. Maybe he's potter in tzitzis. Which is being marbe harei ksus suma omer. That includes the beged of a suma. Hamani mekayim marisa moisai, where is required. It's excluding ksus laila. Why would you be one over the other? The ksus suma is still a visible beged. It's a visible beged, but just person can't see it, but everyone else can see it. That doesn't define a beged that shouldn't be chayv and tzitzis. But nobody sees pajamas, because pajamas are only worn when it's dark. And therefore, that's the item that we would choose to exclude from the mitzvah of tzitzis. What about the man Omar who uses Asher Techasaba to tell you that a beged with 5 corners is mechuyev tzitzis? Nafkale me Asher, from the word Asher Techasaba. The word Asher Loidarish is not extra. Bad. What does bad mean? It says the kohen have to have michnas sevad yilbash al basari sheyishal butz. Butz, I believe, is flax. It's pishton. The article say it's flax. Because Rashi says it means pishton. I'm sorry, linen. Okay, bad. What else? Even not the word bad. Sheyu chadashim. They have to be new. Bad. What else is even bad? Sheyu shazurin. They should be spun, not like pressed felt. Bad. Sheyu chuton kafel shisha. Each thread has to be spun with 6 threads in a bundle. Bad. Shelo yilbash shel choil imahen. You're not allowed to wear any other clothing with it. I understand how you see from bad that it needs to be made out of linen. Butz in media achrini loy. Elabad sheyu chadashim in schakam loy. You're telling me that the worn out begodim are not kosher for big tekuna? We had a brayso a moment ago on Amar Aleph. Worn out clothing is kosher. Amar lay. So he told him back, you're asking me a kasha how you see it meduik in the words. Bad shiyuchut and kaval shisha. Bad chad lechudei mashma. If you want to look at the pashtus of the mashmois of the word bad means one at a time. So if anything, it doesn't mean chut and kaval shisha where you have 6 threads spun together. So how do you see that? Bad chad lechudei mashma. Ella hachigamar. The Rashi is telling you a whole bunch of halachas. There's only one of these halachas that we learn out of bad. They have to be chadashim, they have to be shazurin, they have to be sheichut and kaval shisha. However, yeshmein la mitzvah, some of them are only after mitzvah because it looks nice, but it's not meduyik in the pasuk that that's how it has to be. It's just a nice, it creates a nicer beged. But yeshmein la akiv, bad that it has to be linen, that's ma'akiv, because that is mafurish in the Torah. So yeshmein la akiv butz ushazurin v'chut and kaval shisha. How do you see these things in the lashon of the word butz? Butz could the mafarish vosel is dover oilam in akarka bad bevad, something that one stem grows up at a time. Shazurim, how do you know that has to be spun? Even the bad hainu butz of alma karilo shesh mosar. Normally linen is spun. The chut and kaval shisha we learn out of a different part. How you learn of a different part? Okay, so you learn. So some you learn out of psukim, some are stam. Else it looks nice. Zoktamar mimai the high bad kisnahu. How do you know bad means linen? Rabbi Yosef Rav Chadina davar ha'olam in akaka bad bevad. I guess the way the linen plant grows, it grows out one stem grows from one seed at a time. Maybe it's wool. Imra, maybe it means wool. Zok Gemara, no, it can't be wool because Imra mifza. The Imra, what happens is each fiber spreads into many different parts, not like a singular stalk or stem that grew. Zok Gemara, kifsa nami mifza. Linen will also like splinter into multiple fibers. Zok Gemara, no. If it's pounded, yes, it'll separate. But wool naturally is separate fibers in the bundle, and therefore it's not compatible with the word bad. It says pe'erai pishtim yia al rashim. There should be hats of pishtim on their heads. U'michnas pishtim yom masneya. And lo yachu biyeza. They shouldn't wear something made out of yasa. We'll see what that is later. But you see that their hat and their michnasaim have to be pished on. That's how you know. Correct the Gemara, but that's not a pasuk in the Torah. That's a pasuk in Novi Yecheskel. Until Yecheskel and Novi came, how did we know that the big dekuna have to be made out of linen? You're asking me such a kasha that the fact that it's a Novi is not a good raya. I'll show you an example of the same thing. The following halacha we never saw in Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, but Medivra Yecheskel ben Buzi Lamadu. We see it in the Navi Yecheskel. What does it say there? Kol ben Necher Oral Leiv v'Oral Basar Loyavel Natasha. An Oral Leiv and an Oral Basar. An Oral Basar, we know what it is, but an Oral Leiv is somebody who is, I believe, an apikaris, someone who doesn't believe in the Torah. Oral Leiv means shenisnakru ma'asav machmos orlos liboy. To Oral Leif, he's a Rasha. A Rasha is not allowed to come to the base of English. An Oral is not allowed to come to the base of English. How do you know it? From a pasuk in Yecheskel? Actually, by Yecheskel we know. And how do you know this halacha before? Ela Gemara Gemirla. It must have been halacha l'mashem Mashinai. The halacha must have been already proliferated. But Vasa Yecheskel Vas Mechayekra. And Yecheskel put it in the pasuk. But Avada was there. Hachanami, when it comes to knowing that the big dekuna to be made out of linen, Gemara Gemirla. We know halacha l'mashem Mashinai. And the pasuk was megalit later on in Yecheskel. My lo yachru biyasa. What is this product that you're not allowed to use as your gartel? Lo yachru b'mokim shemazin. It's not the product. It means where you should put your gartel. Don't put your gartel under your arms, where there's creases and folds in your body where it'll sweat. Not below the belt. Over there, there's places where the sun don't shine where it gets sweaty. That's not a proper place to put the gartel. Not above their elbows, because once it's above their elbows, their upper arm leans against their body in your normal stance, and that's going to be a place where sweat will build up. Ella, you know where you should put your gartel? Ella keneged atzila yadein, from their elbows and below. So the on their body from below their elbows to their wrists, that will be a good place to put a gartel. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were to finish Daf Ches, which is Chai, which is the day of Yom Kippur, which we should all be nechtam l'chai through Daf Ches, through Daf Yud Ches. Bez Hashem, on Friday morning, I should be here and we'll be able to learn Daf Yud Ches. Good kibbutz dior, kamach simitoive. We should all be nechtav in the sefer.